We're at Masechet Pesahim, page 65 on the bottom, and then 66. And we are beginning the sixth perek, which is going to start off with the rules and regulations of preparing Korban Pesach when it falls out, when the 14th falls out on Shabbat. And this is going to actually be a foundational story we have about Hillel coming from Bavel, and really the introduction of Hillel, and that he teaches Bnei Betera, the Kal Vachomer and Gezra Shava. So it's a really fantastic and important story. As well as some other musar and a few other halachot. So we start with the Mishnah. Elu devarim ba'Pesach dochin et haShabbat. The following activities to prepare the Korban Pesach override even Shabbat. Shechitato, you have to do shechita of the Pesach. Uzrikat damo, and you have to sprinkle the blood. Umichui kedabav, and also the cleaning of the intestines. Behaktarat halabav, and the burning of that fat on top of the altar. You have to clean out the intestines because it's not respectful to offer. This is the part that's offered up, and you're going to offer it up with, to such a dirty fashion. So all these things are necessary for the Korban, and the Korban has to be done on the 14th in the afternoon. And if that's Shabbat, then so be it. We're going to violate Shabbat even for these things. Truth is that Haktarat Chalabav, technically you could kind of do at night, but it's preferable to do during the day. So that also one can do on Shabbat. We're going to see in the Gemara that this is the majority rabbinic view, but Bnei Betera, who were in charge of in the Bet HaMikdash, did not know this or did not agree to this. So we'll see more. However, roasting it, which means that you're roasting it for your own, for eating it yourself, that you can do after nightfall, after Shabbat is over. So you may as well wait and don't violate Shabbat for that. And also the washing of the inner parts, that also you can wait till after. Not just the cleaning it, but just the thorough washing. It's not going to putrefy if it's a little dirty till nighttime. So those you have to wait till after Shabbat. And now going back, the preparation beforehand, carrying the lamb. If it can't walk by itself, and you're going to have to carry it through a public domain, or if you're going to bring it through Techum Shabbat, more than 2,000 amot out of the city, or if it has a wart that's a blemish, and so the certain types of warts you're allowed to cut off of the animal and thereby make it an unblemished animal. And so only with that would it be worthy of sacrificing. And dochinat Shabbat, even though these are things that you need to do in order to prepare to have the sacrifice, because if it's outside the city, you're not going to be able to bring it as a korban. But these do not override Shabbat, because these are all things you could have done before. You should have thought about that before Shabbat. Friday, go and carry it, bring it out, check for the warts, take them off. And so if you could have done it before, then you're not allowed to do it on Shabbat. You're going to have to find something else. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Dochin, but Rabbi Eliezer, regarding the last group, says it's fine. Even these things override. This is the famous opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, what he says regarding also Brit Milah. Everyone agrees you could do Brit Milah on Shabbat. But Rabbi Eliezer goes further and says you can even carry the knife in the Shut Rabim. You can even go and make a fire to prepare the knife. He says that machshirei mitzvah, even things that you need to prepare for the mitzvah, since you're allowed to do Korban Pesach, anything that you have to do beforehand, even if you could have done it before Shabbat, still is override Shabbat. So Rabbi Eliezer is the most lenient opinion here. Okay, this Mishnah is really fantastic because it includes now a whole dialogue between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva on one side. Rabbi Eliezer on one side, and Rabbi Akiva on the other side, and the other sages on the other side. It's usually this is like a Gemara with this back and forth. Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva on the other side. But this is a Mishnah that includes this very interesting dialogue in which they each bring their proofs. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, v'halo dinhu. He's going to bring a Kal Vachomer that you can even do the preparation, like carrying the animal, even on or bring it from outside the Techum, even on Shabbat. Ma'im shechitashi mishum melacha dochat Shabbat elu shehem mishum shevut lo yidchu et Shabbat. If I'm allowed to violate one of the 39 melachot, like shechita, and slaughter the Korban Pesach on Shabbat, then these other activities, which are only shivut. So that means that they must be carrying and not in the public domain, or bringing outside the Techum, according to those who say it's not. Well, Techum, carrying outside the Techum is not one of the 39 melachot. So these are lesser category. The Bavli is going to call them Dirabanan. In the Mishnah, it looks like they might be Doraita, but they're not part of the 39 melachot. So if I can violate one of the actual 39 to prepare Korban Pesach on Shabbat, then surely these, which are shivut and are less stringent, certainly I should also be able to do them on Shabbat. Okay, that sounds like a good kavachomer. Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Yom Tov yochiach hitiru bo mishum melacha ve'asur bo mishum shivut. He rejects this kavachomer because on Yom Tov, a regular Yom Tov, I'm allowed to go and slaughter an animal and cook it. Anything that I need to prepare a meal, I'm allowed to do on Yom Tov. And yet the rabbis do not permit me to go and bring an animal from outside the Techum, out in the yard, far away. I can't bring it in because I could have done that before. So just like on Yom Tov, anything that I could have done before, even though it's a lower level shivut, I can't do. I'm not allowed to do on Yom Tov. So too, this would be true on Shabbat. And therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the critical thing is how stringent it is. And the shechita is more stringent, that's permitted, so lesser stringent is also okay. According to Rabbi Yeshua, the critical question is if you could have done it before, even if it's of a lower stringency, and you cannot violate Shabbat or Yom Tov for it. Amar le Rabbi Eliezer, Maze Yehoshua. He says, what kind of comparison is that, Rabbi Yoshua? How can you compare something that's optional to something that's a mitzvah? Regarding eating on Yom Tov, cooking on Yom Tov, that's optional. You feel like having a steak on Yom Tov. Okay, so then you're allowed to do shechita. You can't go and bring the animal from outside the techum. But that's all the shoot. But here, we're talking about a mitzvah, right, to do Korban Pesach. And so therefore, it's not comparable. I could agree with you that on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to bring the animal from outside, or for Pesach, you should be allowed to. So he goes back and relies on his kavachomer. Heshiv Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so that was all Rabbi Yoshua, and now Rabbi Akiva comes and helps out his colleague. And it's Be'amad Haza'at Tochiach Shehi Mishum Mitzvah Vehi Mishum Shevut Ve'ena Docha Et HaShabbat. If someone is Tameh Lamet, and they have to get sprinkled with Para Aduma on the 3rd and 7th day. Let's say the 7th day is the 14th of Nisan, and it's Shabbat. We don't do Haza'ah. We don't purify that person, even though they won't be able to bring the Korban Pesach because they're Tameh. We don't violate. It's a Shivut, right? You're not doing a Melacha, but it's not a restful thing to do. And so look at that, right? So here's a perfect example. That is a mitzvah, and there's a shivut, and you need it in order to eat Korban Pesach, and yet everyone agrees that we do not do haza'ah. So too, we would not do any preparation, even for a mitzvah, and not bring the animal from outside the techum for Korban Pesach. Afata al titmal elu shafal pi shehem mishum mitzvah vehen mishum shivut lo yidchu et haShabbat. So regarding all the other things in the Mishnah, they are also we need them for mitzvah, and they are asum mishum shivut, so they would not violate Shabbat. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer has a counter. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, ve'aleha anidan, u'ma im shechita shu mishum melacha dochat haShabbat, haza'ah shi mishum shivut eno din shedochat haShabbat. You bring your proof from haza'ah. I would argue the opposite, that therefore haza'ah is permitted. If shechita, which is one of the 39 melachot, and I can override Shabbat to do shechita of the Korban Pesach, then sprinkling the Para Aduma on someone who's tameh, which is only a shivut, and they need it in order to be tahor, to bring Korban Pesach, for sure it would override. So you see, they're going deeper and deeper down to the essence of their machloket. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva o chiluf. Wait a second, you brought the Kal Vachomer one way, I'll bring the Kal Vachomer the other way to make them all stringent. And na docha et haShabbat, I think that sprinkling the Paraduma does not override. So therefore, shechita shehi mishum melacha enodin shelo tidche et haShabbat. And so I would prove based on that you're not allowed to do shechita even on Shabbat. That is the 14th. Okay, now Rabbi Akiva doesn't actually think this because the Mishnah already said that everyone agrees you can do shechita. Rabbi Akiva is simply pointing out that according to your logic, that you want to tie this to haza'ah, then you could equally come up with the opposite conclusion. Not that all these things are permitted, but all these things are prohibited. He would rather say that the difference is between something you could have done before and something that you could not have done before. And then Rabbi Akiva can actually make sense of all the cases. אמר לו רבי אליעזר עקיבא, עקרת מה שכתוב בתורה במועדו, בין בחול, בין בשבת. Rabbi Eliezer says, I wouldn't follow your logic, the logic that you proposed to me, and use the kal v'chomer for stringency, because that kind of kal v'chomer would uproot a fundamental law of the Torah. The law says b'mo'ado, that you have to bring the Pesach at its appointed time. That means no matter when it is, whether it's Chol or Shabbat. We have a similar ruling regarding Brit Milah. It says ubayom hashemini. So it has to be on the eighth day, even if it's on Shabbat. So too, b'mo'ado says that you bring Korban Pesach even if the 14th is Shabbat. And since that's permitted, Eliezer uses his kal v'chomer to say, well then, haza'ah, which is lesser, only a shivut, should also be permitted, and also bringing something from outside the Tchum should also be permitted. So Rabbi Eliezer says, I'm consistent because I could not do it all for stringency, because that would go against this fundamental of the Torah, which you all agree with. This b'mo'ado is going to come up again in the story we're about to read. Amar lo Rabbi, haveli mo'ed la'elu kemo'ed hashechita. So Rabbi Akiva says, I agree with your mo'ed that you can do shechita, and if you would bring me a similar word like yours to prove all the other activities, like bringing from outside to Tchum, then I would agree with you. Whereas the word mo'ed tells me that I need to slaughter the Korban Pesach on the 14th and no other day. But there's no equivalent learning, no equivalent pasuk that says I have to also bring it on from outside the Tchum on the 14th. So yeah, what you learned explicitly, I would agree with, but otherwise not. So to conclude, Rabbi Akiva called melacha she'efshar lasota me'erev Shabbat ena dochat Shabbat. Shechita she'efshar lasota me'erev Shabbat dochat Shabbat. So Rabbi Akiva's general rule, and Rabbi Yeshua's also, is any activity that you could have done from before Shabbat, does not override Shabbat. However, shechita you cannot do before, because the Torah says be'mo'ado, you have to do it in the afternoon of the 14th. And so that does override Shabbat. And so to anything else, obviously, if you have to do the slaughtering on Shabbat, then the sprinkling also, anything that comes after. But anything before does not override. The Eliezer disagrees with this entirely and says, no, a kal v'chomer, this is stringent, shechita, and that's permitted, and any shavut, even if you could have done it before, is permitted. All right, that is the Mishnah. And now we have the Gemara, which brings an even older fundamental controversy about even the law of slaughtering it on Shabbat itself. Okay, Teno Rabbanan, halacha zo nit'alema mi bnei betera. Bnei betera, it was one of the families we mentioned a couple of chapters ago that were in charge in the Bet HaMikdash. They were like the ritual committee. They knew all the these are the old guys in shul, that they know what happens when do you say Shira Shirim on this Shabbat when it falls on Chanukah? Right? They knew all the rules and regulations. However, one time it happened that the 14th of Nisan fell out on Shabbat, and they did not know the halacha. Do we slaughter the Korban Pesach on the 14th or not? I mean, in general, Korban Tamid and Musaf. In general, those are the only two things that can override Shabbat. And you always have Rosh Chodesh also. But the question is, Pesach, you're not even eating it on that day. So can you violate Shabbat for Korban that you're not actually going to be eating on that day? So they didn't know the answer. One time it happens and they didn't know. The general question is, how could they not know? Wouldn't it happen about once every 7 years if they relied on witnesses to come and say when Rosh Chodesh is? The possible answer is that they might have changed the system of the calendar. It could be that in earlier times, they actually did have a fixed calendar in which they made sure that Pesach would never fall out on Shabbat. For the sectarians, in fact, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, they had a calendar in which Pesach the 14th rather, would never fall out on Shabbat. So the Dead Sea sect would say, no, you're not allowed to violate Shabbat for Korban Pesach. And so they would make a calendar specifically in that way. And there were time periods when the Beit HaMikdash was run by Sadducees. So it could be that there was a long span of decades in which this actually did not occur. And maybe that explains why they didn't know what to do. So they said, how are we going to find an answer? Amru, kilum yesh adam sheyodei pesach dochet Shabbat im lav. Does anybody here know the law if we can prepare Korban Pesach on Shabbat? Amru lahem, adam echad yesh she'ala miBavel veHillel habavli shemo sheshimesh shenei gedolei hador Shemaya ve'Ab Talyon. Says, yes, there's a person here, he just made Aliyah from Bavel. His name is Hillel, the Babylonian. And he studied with the great sages of the generation, Shemayan, Abtayon. They were the last of the heirs of the Zugot. V'yodea im Pesach dochet Shabbat im lav, and he knows the answer to this. Okay, good. Shalchu v'karulo, they brought him, and they said, Amru lo, kilu matay yodea im Pesach dochet Shabbat im lav. We heard you might have an answer to our question. He said, Amar lehem v'chi Pesach echad yesh lanu b'shana shedochet Shabbat. He answers in a wry way. He says, "What is there only one Pesach that overrides Shabbat during the year? We have more than 200 Korban Pesach during the year that override Shabbat." They must be scratching their heads, like, what is he talking about? We only bring one Pesach a year. What's 200? He seems to be alluding to the fact that we bring many Korbanot that are like Korban Pesach. Just like Korban Pesach is a communal sacrifice, so also Olah and Musaf, and Korban Tamid, rather. Korban Tamid is 2 a day, and Musaf is Shekevasim, that's also 2 animals. That's 4 animals that you bring every Shabbat, no matter what, times 52 weeks. That's more than 200 animals that you would bring. So he's like, what's the difference? You violate, right? We override Shabbat with these communal sacrifices all the time. So Korban Pesach is just another one of them. Okay, obviously they needed a little bit more than that. Amru lo minayin lecha. What's your source? How do you know that this specifically Korban Pesach also violated? Because those are really not comparable, because those Korbanot are done on Shabbat for Shabbat, but the Korban Pesach is done on Shabbat for the next day, for the next night. Amar lehem ne'emar mo'ado ba'Pesach, ne'emar mo'ado be'tamid. So he brings a Gezerah Shavah. The word mo'ado, you have to bring to Korban Pesach at its time. It's said regarding Pesach in Numbers 19, and it also says be'mo'ado regarding Korban Tamid. Ma mo'ado hamor ba'tamid dochet Shabbat, af mo'ado hamor ba'Pesach dochet Shabbat. So he's actually backing up his 200 number, right? And says the Torah, since it uses the same word in both, is saying treat the Pesach like the Korban Tamid, just like Korban Tamid of right Shabbat, so too Pesach. This is very important regarding the origin of Gezerah Shavah. A lot of times we see a Gezerah Shavah, you pick one word here, the, and this is the word the there, and it looks kind of arbitrary. But this is one of the earliest Gezerah Shavot, and if you do a search for the word Be'mo'ado in all of the Torah, what you'll find is it appears only in 2 contexts, in Bemidbar Tet regarding Korban Pesach, and in 28 regarding Korban Tamid. That's it. So it's a unique phrase. And in fact, a lot of the early ones in the school, in all the Midrashim of Rabbi Akiva, are phrases that occur only 2 times throughout the Torah. And so you see that these are really strong. And it's not just an arbitrary word. It's the word that says you have to bring it on at this time. So it's actually a perfectly logical and reasonable source that really anyone, that does concordance work, or you want to know what this word means and you see only one other occurrence, it's actually a very strong proof. And the early Gezerot Shavot are also contextually very strong. But this is the burial place of Hillel, according to tradition. I don't know if he's actually there or not. Okay, ve'od kal vachomer. And he says, besides, not only a Gezerah Shavah, also Hillel says, I can prove it from a Kal Vachomer. Umat tamid she'en anush karet, dochet haShabbat Pesach, she'anush karet, en odin shedochet haShabbat. Korban Tamid does not, if you don't bring a Korban Tamid, you don't get karet. And yet it overrides Shabbat. Pesach, which is even more stringent in that you get a karet, a punishment of karet if you fail to bring the Korban Pesach, so all the more so. Pesach is more stringent than the Korban Tamid. Okay, so he brought these really three proofs. One is that kind of general analogy. They do Korban Tamid all the time. Then it gets at Hashava. And then a Kavachomer, Miyad Hoshivu Berosh Minu Nasi Alehem. Immediately they appointed him to be the head, to be the Nasi, at the head of the community. And he taught them the whole day all about Pesach. So this is really the story of the rise of Hillel to greatness. Okay. This is the Bavli version. This story also appears in the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi version. I wrote something about this that I'm happy to send you. And in the Yerushalmi version, he brings proofs all day long, another proof, and they rejected all the proofs until at the end of the day says, I have a tradition in the name of Shemaya and Avtayon that you're allowed to bring Korban Pesach on Shabbat, and then they accepted it. You see in the Bavli, he doesn't say it's a tradition. He just says he brings the proofs. This is actually very important. It shows that in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the highest value is a tradition, something that you learn from a master. Whereas in the Bavli, the highest value is someone who can reason and show through Kavachomer Gezer Hashava what how to achieve the right halacha. In fact, but I'll tell you more about that in a second because the Bavli is going to bring another section that's more similar to the Yerushalmi. Okay, so now they make him the head and he's teaching all day. While he's teaching, and he started giving them some rebuke. Look what caused that I had to come all the way from Bavel. You didn't have anybody in Israel that knew the answer until you relied on me to come to Bavel and to make you the head over you. Because you were all lazy. You didn't go and study from the great masters of the generation. And so, in your laziness, that's why you didn't know the answer. So, don't do that. Go and study from the best. Then they're discussing more halachot. They ask him another thing. Hillel, if someone forgot to bring the knife to do shechita, so then what's the law? He has the animal, right? The animal can walk, but what about bringing the knife? We just saw that in the Mishnah, right? Rabbi Eliezer would say, fine, but the rabbis say no. What do you do? Hillel says, oh, I heard this tradition from Shemaya Abtalion, but I forgot what they said. But Israel, even if they're not prophets, their sons are prophets. In other words, they know the right thing to do. You want to see what the right thing to do? Go see what people do. This is an amazing thing. Now Hillel himself forgot halacha. So they went to see, well, what are people going to do? They're God-fearing people. How are they going to figure out a solution? So if someone had a lamb, they took the knife and they stuck it into the wool. So the lamb carried its own knife. If it was a goat, then they put it between its horns, and that way they didn't have to carry it themselves. The animal would just carry it on its own, and when they got to Bebetash, they could take out the knife. When he saw that, Hillel said, oh yeah, that's the halacha. Right now they reminded me that is in fact what the halacha is. Okay, that's the end of the Baraita, the story about Hillel. Okay, now the Gemara is going to go and analyze each section of that story. This is Amar Mor. We just mentioned part of that story. Ne'emar b'mo'ado b'Pesach, ne'emar b'mo'ado b'Tamid. Ma mo'ado hamor b'Tamid dochet haShabbat, af mo'ado hamor b'Pesach dochet haShabbat. This is quoting the Gezer HaShabbat. The word b'mo'ado occurs here and there, only in those two contexts. And so therefore, just like Korban Tamid is done even on Shabbat, so to Korban Pesach has to be prepared even on Shabbat. Tamid gufem min elam dedache Shabbat. However, question is, how about Korban Tamid? How do you know that itself is done even on Shabbat? If you're saying from the word b'mo'ado has to be on that time, but Pesach also says it. So, but we just said we're learning Pesach from Korban Tamid. Korban Tamid, if you learn it from the word b'mo'ado, then I don't need the Gezer HaShavah. Obviously, the word b'mo'ado is not sufficient. Actually, in the Mishnah, if you remember, they did quote b'mo'ado to mean that this is the day. Okay, but this is a different derivation. Ela mo'ado lo mashmaleh. Hachaname mo'ado lo mashmaleh. So you see that obviously the word b'mo'ado does not, we do not, according to Hillel, does not mean that even on Shabbat, just that word by itself, that word can only be used as an analogy word. Ela markera olat Shabbat b'Shabbato al olat tamid. Mikelal the tamid kereba b'Shabbat. Rather, it's actually an explicit pasuk. I mean, really, nobody can argue with this. When it talks about, we're going to read this. We read this every Rosh Chodesh, right? Olat Shabbat b'Shabbato. That's the Korban Musaf. In addition to Olat HaTamid. So this is the paragraph talking about Shabbat, and it says you bring the Olat HaTamid. So it's actually quite explicit. But since we absolutely know that on Korban Tamid you bring on Shabbat, then now b'mo'ado can tell you even on Pesach. So this is acceptable. We accept the Gezerah Shabbat. Okay, now in the next part of analysis, stands in some tension to the previous analysis, but okay. אמר מור ועוד קל וחומר, מה תמיד שאין נושקרת דוחה את השבת, פסח שנושקרת, אינו דין שדוחה את השבת. The קל וחומר said that Korban Tamid, which is less stringent, because you don't get karet if you don't do it, and that violates, that overrides Shabbat. Pesach, which does get karet, if you don't do it, then all the more so. But we can reject this kal vachomer. Every kal vachomer, you can always find something that this is more weighty than that, and that's more weighty than this. Korban Tamid, you bring every single day, and it also is an olah. It's all totally, it's kodesh kadashim. So in that way, it's more stringent than Korban Pesach, which does not have those aspects. Kal vachomer amala. So therefore, weirdly, we can reject this kal vachomer. Okay, truth is, kal vachomer amar lehu beresha ufrachu. V'hadar amar lehu gezerah shava. Oh, so it must be that actually first Hillel told them the kal vachomer. They rejected it, then he says, okay, here's a gezerah shava. Wait, does that really work? If he had a gezerah shava, if he had a gezerah shava, then why did he bother telling them the kal vachomer? See, the gezerah shava is a solid proof, isn't it? Ela ledidu kamar lehu bishlama gezerah shava la gamritu en adam dan gezerah shava me'atzmo ela kal vachomer adam dan me'atzmo iba'e lechu lemedan amru le kal vachomer pirchahu. Rather, what Hillel was saying that to them is, according to you, because you have a rule that you can't make a gezerah shava on your own, only a gezerah that you received from tradition. So maybe you'll reject my gezerah shava. Oh, but I have a kal vachomer for it, but they rejected the kal vachomer, so we had to go back and rely on the gezerah shava. Okay, this section does have a parallel in the Yerushalmi, and this is part of in the Yerushalmi when Hillel presents all the reasons, they reject each one according to this. However, this rule that you can only make a gezerah shava from tradition and not on your own is not found in early sources, not found in Tannaitic sources. So you see that in the original story, right? He presented this. And this would have been good. This would have been fine. Later on, when gezerah shava becomes applied much more loosely, and even a word that doesn't appear only twice, even words that are not extra, so then rabbis had to make a cap on them and say you cannot derive them anymore. And so you see that this Gemara is bringing that Amoraic rule and applying it to the Tannaitic story. But in any case, there are in fact two versions of the story. But in either one, you see that Bnei Betara didn't know this halacha, and in the Yerushalmi version, Hillel knew the tradition all along, but waited till the end of the day to teach it to them. Why? It seems that he actually wanted to show them that you can derive the same halacha from tradition as you can from reason. He's actually kind of introducing the laws of reason of gezerah shava, kal vachomer. And says, there's going to be new cases that come up, and you're going to need to find a way to find explanations for them through these methods of interpretive derivation. And then by the time it gets to Bavli, they actually are accepted in the original story, but then later on, it brings some questions about them. Okay, a lot more to say about that story, but you see that's really foundational, especially for Hillel's rise to become the Nasi. All right, and so now we're going to get to some musad. Amar mo'ad lemachar mi shepischot taleh tocheh lo besamro, yedi tocheh ben keranav. So the next day they saw that people brought the knives with the animal itself. Hold on, how could you take the knife and put it in the horns or in the wool? And aren't you actually using kodashim? You designated this animal already to be a sacrifice, to be Korban Pesach, and now you're putting a burden on it. You're making it work. You're not allowed to make the animal that's kodesh work. The answer is ki Hillel. Hillel had a system by which he made sure that no one would ever misuse his burnt offerings. How did he do that? What he would do, he would not designate the Pesach while he was at home. He would bring it as a regular animal, and once he got to the Bet HaMikdash, then he would say, this will be my Pesach, and he would do semicha. Doesn't mean he would make it a rabbi. He would put his hands on it and say, this will be my korban. It's kind of putting his weight on it. This represents his own being. And so since he only made it Kodesh in the Bet HaMikdash right before he was about to slaughter it, that way there was no possibility that it would be misused, in case someone put something on the animal and carried it for him. So that's how they did it. The animals carried this, but they weren't Kodesh yet. Okay, but that leads to another problem. Pesach v'Shabbat, are you allowed to actually designate a korban as a sacrifice on Shabbat? The Mishnah says no. V'atanan en makdishin ve'en ma'adichin ve'en ma'harimin ve'en magbihin teruma u'ma'asrot. Kol elu b'yom tov amiru kal v'chomer b'Shabbat. You're not allowed to consecrate animals or make a valuation vow. You say, I'm going to donate my value. Or you make a cherem, right? This, I donate this item. I'm not going to use it. It's now Kodesh. And you don't bring tiruma or ma'aser. All those not only on Yom Tov, all the more so on Shabbat. So you see, this is not going to work. Hillel system cannot work on Shabbat, in which when you're not allowed to make an animal consecrated on Shabbat. The answer is Hanemele bechobot she'en kavua lahem zeman, aval bechobot shekavua lahem zeman maktishin. Now this Mishnah that said you're not allowed to make a hekdesh on Shabbat, that's only talking about something that does not have a set time. If I said I'm going to, I vow I'm going to bring a sacrifice, but I didn't say when, so I can do it another day. So then do it another day. But this one, Korban Pesach, has to be done that day. And then that one, I am allowed to consecrate it even on Shabbat. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Akdish Adam et Pischo b'Shabbat, Chagigato b'Yom Tov. Similarly, the Korban Chagiga, to celebrate the holiday, I can sanctify it on Yom Tov because it has to be done on that day. All right, another problem with the system, mehamer, and you're driving, right? You're driving a laden animal. You're working the animal, and that's a melacha in and of itself. You're not allowed to work an animal. If you make an animal carry a burden, that's working the animal. The answer is he's doing an unusual way. Usually an animal carries a burden in a pack. If it's carrying grain or whatever, it doesn't carry knives between its horns. That's an unusual way, and therefore it's more lenient. Okay, fine. Because you did it in an unusual way. Still, it would be isur midrabanan. Yes, that's precisely the question that Bnei Betera were asking Hillel. They knew all of these details, and they were asking him in the case like this. I have something that I'm allowed to do midoraita because I'm not carrying in a usual way. But it is an unusual way because I'm doing it kilahad yad, so it's still drabanan, still shivut. And I uproot it, the rabbinic decree, and permit it by doing kilahad yad. And when it's for the sake of a mitzvah, in this case, it's for the sake of a mitzvah of being able to do shechita. Can't do shechita on the animal if I don't have a knife. And that was the question. Oh, good question. I did learn it, but I forgot what I learned. And that's what he answered and said, that let's see what people actually do. And that way he remembered the halacha. This is actually extremely important source. Because what you have here is shivut d'shvut b'makom mitzvah. When you have something that is the rabbanan to begin with, and you do it kilachad yad, and it's for mitzvah, then in many cases that is permitted. For example, if someone lives on a high floor, live on the 100th floor of a building, and they're not able to walk up and down, and they have to get to Beit Knesset. Are they allowed to ask a goy or to press the elevator button? I'm not going to give up psak halacha here, but this would be a source to apply that principle of shivut b'shut b'makom mitzvah. And of course, each case we have to decide whether and how that principle applies, but this is a source for it. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Kol hamityahed im chacham hu chochmato mistaleket mimenu im navi hu nevuato mistaleket mimenu. Okay, important musar. Anyone who acts haughtily, if he is a Torah scholar, then his scholarship will leave him. If he's a prophet, his prophecy will leave him. Let's see examples. Im chacham hu chochmato mistaleket mimenu. How do we know that? Hillel. Where did we see that Hillel became haughty? Well, he started giving rebuke and making fun of the people. Because you were lazy, because you didn't go and study. That's why you forgot this halacha, you guys b'nei b'tara. He was like lording it over them. And what happened? He forgot his own learning. Right, so Hillel, it's appropriate to give rebuke, but in a humble way. Where do we see a prophet whose prophecy left her because she was acting in a haughty way? It says the villagers ceased. They ceased in Israel, like there was nobody around, nobody helping out, doing anything until I came, right? As a mother in Israel. The word shakamti is actually not first person grammatically, but it's an ancient form of the second person, like in Arabic, inti. So till you rose up. Anyways, it's actually being written like as if someone else praising Devorah until you came up. But in any case, it does look like the first person, and I think that's how the Gemara is taking it. And so Devorah says, nobody was around until I came. Oh, it's not nice to speak about yourself in that way, self-glorifying. So what happened next? Ori, Devorah, Ori, the Berishir. Right, get up, Devorah, and say something. In other words, Devorah lost her prophecy, and she had to be encouraged to go back into state of prophetic insight because she lost it, because she was self-glorifying. Okay, amazing source there, interpretation. While you're on the topic of people who great people, even great people who don't act 100% correctly, anyone who gets angry, once that person gets angry, if he's a wise person, his wisdom will leave him. If he's a prophet, his prophecy will leave him. How do we see that? Moshe, we learn that from Moshe Rabbeinu. Tichtiv, Iksof Moshe al Pikudei HaHayil. Uchtiv, Vayomer Elazar HaKohen El Anshe Hasaba Ba'im El Melchama Zot Chukat HaTorah Shisba Adonai Et Moshe Mikela de Moshe I'alem Mineh. This is a story about the war against Midian when the generals come back from the war and said, mission accomplished. We went, we conquered Midian, we got all the soldiers. And we captured the women. Moshe sees that and says, you captured the women and left them alive? They're the ones that caused the sin in the first place. Go back and kill them. And it doesn't say what they did. What the next paragraph says, Elazar HaKohen was taught them the laws of kashrut, what to do with the pots and pans that they got, how to kosher them. It's unusual. Why is Elazar teaching the halacha and not Moshe? It looks like Moshe got angry at the generals. Because he got angry, he lost his wisdom, and that's why he was not able to teach that halacha. That doesn't say explicitly here, but in parallels to this midrash, it says that Moshe gave the wrong ruling. You're not supposed to go and kill the women and the children in any war. And because he came to anger, he came to lose his chokhmah. Even someone as great as Moshe. Where do we see that even a prophet who gets angry will lose his prophecy? From the story regarding Elisha, where it says, this is regarding the war against Moab, when the king of the north, Yehoram, joined together with Yehoshaphat, the king of Judea of the south. And Yehoshaphat says, there is any Navi that can give us some guidance in the war. And they said, yeah, Elisha is here because Achav had killed everybody else. And so Elisha comes and says, listen, he says to the king of the north, I'm not coming for you. Right? If it was if it were not that I have regard for the presence of Yehoshaphat, the king of Judea, he was a righteous person, I would not even look at you, Yehoram. And so you see, he acts he says in an angry way. It acts in an angry way, angry words towards Yehoram. And what happens next? And now, when he wants to go get prophecy, he says, "Bring me someone who can play an instrument, so I can get into the prophetic mode." So where they're understanding it as he lost the prophetic mode because he got angry, and now he has to go back into it. So that's the danger of anger. Okay, very good. And furthermore about anger, Amar bi mani bar patish. Kol shekoes afilu poskin alav gedula min hashamayim moridin oto. Someone who gets angry, even if he was had a portion that he would be a great person, that he was destined to be a great person, he loses it. He's lowered from his greatness because of his anger. How do we know that? Min elan me Eliav. This is the older brother of King David, son of Yishai. שנאמר ויחרף אליאב בדוד ויאמר למה זה ירדת ועל מי נטשת מעט אסון הנה במדבר אני ידעתי את זדונך ואת זרוע לבביך כי למען רעות מלחמה ירדת. This is when they were battling Goliath before David goes and kills him. David was a kid and he was tending the sheep at home. And then his father said, go and take some provisions to the front lines. And when his older brother Eliav sees him, he says, what are you doing here? Who's watching the sheep? I know why you came here. You didn't come to help us out. You came because you want to come and see the action. So Eliav spoke not in a nice way. He spoke in anger. So what happened to him? So later on, when Shemuel came to anoint the next king, he went son by son from the oldest all the way to the youngest. They thought it would be the oldest, right? He says, no, this is God did not choose this one. God did not choose it. When they got to the youngest, oh, isn't there another kid here? David comes. He says, yeah, that's the one. So regarding all the older brothers, it just says neutrally, God did not choose this one. But Eliav Ketiv, do not look at his outward appearance because I have rejected him. It's a much more negative rejection regarding Eliav. Why? Why the specific negative towards him? Because before that, God actually had chosen him, loved him, and he was destined to have a position of greatness, but because he spoke in an angry, not nice way to his younger brother, David, so he lost out on that greatness. On that greatness, God has now rejected him. Okay, that's the wonderful lessons. And now we get back to the halacha. Ashkehan tamid upesach dedachu Shabbat, dedachu tum'ah minalan. Okay, so we know that Korban Tamid and Korban Pesach both override Shabbat. We learned that already. But how do we know that they override tum'ah? That if most of the people in the community are tameh, lamet, that you also can do Korban Pesach, and you can also do, we saw that already, but also Korban Tamid, which is an amazing thing, because that means even nowadays, most people, everyone is tameh, lamet, yet that should not stop us from doing Korban Tamid. Amri ki hechi dialef Pesach mitamid linyan Shabbat, achiname yalif tamid mi Pesach linyan Tumah. Oh, we have a portal open. We have an analogy that we made between Pesach and Korban Tamid. So just like we learned from dialif Pesach mi Tamid, we learned from Tamid that you do it even on Shabbat, and so to Pesach you do it even on Shabbat. So now we could use it for the other way. Just like Korban Pesach, you bring it even though when most people are tameh. So to Korban Tamid, you can bring when most people are tameh. All right, good. But now we have to go back. How do we know that the Korban Pesach itself you bring in when everyone's tameh. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kera, ish ki yeh tameh la nefesh. Ish nidche lepesach sheni, ve'en sibur nidchin lepesach sheni. Ela abdi betum'ah. Because the pasuk says, each and every person, anyone, meaning who is tameh la nefesh. Tameh la nefesh sounds like from a corpse impurity. So that means ish nidche lepesach sheni. An individual who is tameh, or in this case, any tumah. Someone who's an individual's tameh is pushed off. He can't do the regular Pesach. He does it a month later, Pesach Sheni. But what if it's everyone? Then they don't have to. Does everyone go and do Pesach Sheni? No, they do Pesach Rishon betum'ah. So because the pasuk says ish, so therefore Pesach Sheni only applies to individuals, but a community does not do Pesach Sheni. They would do Pesach Rishon instead. That's Rabbi Yochanan's derivation. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, Ema ish nidche lePesach Sheni, Sibur let lo takanta lo Pesach Rishon lo Pesach Sheni. Resh Lakish says that's not a necessary derivation. You can equally say a single person gets to do a makeup on Pesach Sheni, but if everybody's tameh, then they get no makeup. They can't do it at all, right? That's the more logical explanation of the pasuk, right? Not that everyone will do it bitumah on Pesach Rishon. So Resh Lakish doesn't like that one. Ela amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish me'acha v'yishalechu min ha'machane kol sarua v'chol zav v'chol tameh la nafesh. He's going to learn it from this pasuk that has nothing to do with Pesach, but rather it's just talking about the encampment, and you cannot have any people that are tameh in the camp. So who do you send out? Anyone who's sarua, mesora, zav, or tameh la nefesh. Now why do you have to say all three? Yomar tameh metim v'al yomar zavinu mesora'in. Let the pasuk just say tameh lamet, and the other ones I can learn from that. And the omer im tameh metim nishtalachin zavim mesora'in lo kol sheken. If someone's tameh met cannot be in, then all the more so zav and mesorah. Why they think zav and mesorah is worse? Because zav and mesorah, the tumah comes from their own body. It's self-produced. That's worse than tameh met, in which case I just touched a dead body. It's outside of me. And so since they're worse, really the pasuk could have just said, tameh met goes out. Why does it have to add also zavin and metzorah go out? I could have learned that from a kavach omer. Ela yesh lecha sha'a shezavin u'mesora'in mishtalachin ve'en tameh metim mishtalachin. Rather, there must be another occasion, right? Not the usual encampment, but some other time when zavin and mesora'in are sent out, but tameh met are not sent out. When would we accept tameh met, not the other ones? This must be referring to a time when everyone is tameh lamet, and they have to do korban pesach. Then those that are tameh met can stay and do the korban pesach, but not those who are zavin and mesora'in. If you have a little patience for just another couple of minutes, I'd like to finish this argument because there's going back and forth regarding it. Amar Abaye, Ihachi lema name yomar zav utme'e metim v'al yomar mesorah. Abaye says, according to your logic, Resh Lakish, then really you don't even need zav and it could have said zav and tameh met. They have to leave the machaneh. And I don't say mesorah. I would have known that mesorah. Ani omer zav mishtaleach mesorah lo kol sheken. Mesorah is worse than zav. So then I would know that mesorah leaves, and I can derive everything. Ela yesh lecha sha'a shemesora'in mishtalachin ve'en zavin utme'e met mishtalachin ve'zeh pesach haba betumah. So I'm just using your logic. I could say as follows: there must be some occasion on which mesorah is sent out, but not a zav and not tameh met. So what is that? Regard it would be Pesach, and that would teach me that if everybody is a zav, they can also do korban Pesach on the regular day. And no, that's impossible because nobody thinks that's true. And if you'll say, yeah, so let zavim also come and be included. If most people are tameh met or zav, then they can also come and do the regular date of korban Pesach. Pesach haba betumah lo yochelu menu zavim v'zavot nidot v'yoledot v'machlu piturin. The Mishnah says that when everybody is tameh lamet, then those people who are tameh only Tameh Lamet can do it. But even in that case, those who are Zavim, Zavot, Nidot, and people who gave birth recently who are Tameh, they cannot join in with the Korban Pesach. So, even when we do this collective Tum'ah law, the Zavim are out. So therefore, this logic would not be wrong. And Abaye says, I'm rejecting your entire logic, Resh Lakish, because by your logic, I'm going to get to a false conclusion. Rather, he's going to go back to the Biur Hanan's derivation, and with the ish. And im ken nichtob lachamana ish ki yeh tameh lanefesh lamali. Right. Our problem with that one was it says an individual who's tameh does Pesach Sheni. But if everyone is tameh, it's not really clear. Does that mean everyone does a Pesach Sheni, or Resh Lakish said no one does anything at all? There's no makeups at all. So he's going to prove that Rabbi Yochanan is right because it says ish ki tameh lanefesh. Why does it add the word lanefesh? Maybe you'll think that only someone who's tameh met on the 14th of Nisan can do a makeup on Pesach Sheni. But someone who was a Zav or Nida on Pesach Rishon, they do not have a makeup. Right? I might think that only Tameh Lanefesh, but that's not a true conclusion. Pesach Sheni. אלא טמא מתים ושיהיה בדרך רחוקה, זבים מסורים בעלי נידות מנין, תמיד לומר איש, על הנפש תכתב רחמנה, למה לי? So we see that the halacha is that anyone who's tameh for any reason on the 14th of Nisan, or in a far away, they get to, or someone who became tameh because they were with a nidah, all those people are allowed to do a makeup on Pesach Sheni. And we learn that from the word ish, every single person, all types of tumah. So the word lanefesh, what is it coming to teach me? Ela hachik ka'amar, ish nidche lePesach Sheni, ve'en sibor nidche lePesach Sheni. Ish, only an individual does a makeup on Pesach Sheni, but not a whole community. Ela abdi betumah. So when do they do it? They do it on the 14th of Nisan. So if it's only an individual, they have to get pushed off. But the whole community, in fact, does it on the 14th. And that was Rabbi Yochanan's derivation. And if that happens, and the whole community is Tameh Met, and they do it anywhere on the 14th, nevertheless, only those who are Tameh Lamet can bring the Korban, but not someone who's a Zav, a Mitzorah, or Nida, they would still not be able to do it, and those individuals would have to do it the next month when they are in fact pure. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.
Question?